There we are again. Ladies and gentlemen, what a fantastic morning we all had. We looked at the most inspiring digital innovations from the South, and they were actually splendid. We know some people didn't get through, but we posted everything, so go and look at these companies and organization projects because they are super interesting. Bart, as my sidekick, what did you think of this morning?
Well, let me just refer to yesterday when Senai said how civil society could direct artificial intelligence. I think we could not have a better manifestation of this than this morning with all these very inspiring digital innovations from Africa, from Latin America, and from Asia. I think that really proves what kind of richness there is, but it also showed us a number of challenges. The challenges of inclusion, of literacy, of affordability. And so I think, let me just look forward, I hope, and I'm anxious to see how this resonates this afternoon.
Absolutely. And the challenge of internet access in different forms for everybody around the planet. Delighted, though, that we are going to introduce our next speaker. Our guest, Jeremy Hymans, is with us, calling in from New York, where they don't have super HD fast broadband connections, maybe because he's a little bit fuzzy in the screen there. But anyway, I'm going to introduce Jeremy first, and then you can listen to him. We're absolutely thrilled to have him here. He's the CEO of Partos. He's very well known because he wrote a book called New Power, How Power Works in Our Hyper-Connected World, which is, of course, at the heart of the discussion we've been having for the last 2 days. But he's a very active guy. I mean, he's also founded Avaz, for anybody that knows that. If you want to start your own petition, use Avaz. He, long time ago, but nevertheless, founded GetUp, an Australian movement to get better democracy, more local democracy. And now he's founded Purpose, which has this super interesting title. It's a social movement incubator. Now, social movements, that's what we need. Jeremy, we're absolutely happy and thrilled to have you here. And I give you the word and the screen. There you go.
Monique, thank you so much. It's delighted to be here. I do see the fuzz actually, which is very disappointing because we pay for very good broadband, but hopefully it will improve as it adjusts to New York City. But it's great to be with you all, and I am going to share with you some insights and kind of a way to think about how power is changing. So I'm going to present some slides. So just bear with me while I kind of present the slides. Give me 1 second here. All right. Okay, great. So let's kind of quickly take you through this concept, and I hope it's a useful tool for you to think about some of the very questions that I know you've been talking about over this morning. So let's set the scene. 2020, a tale of two worlds. Harvey Weinstein. I hate to bring him up, but remember Harvey Weinstein, right? This titan of industry, this captain of Hollywood who ruled it like an iron fist. And even though it was an open secret that he was an abuser, he somehow managed to protect himself for decades and live atop that Hollywood hierarchy. You know, Harvey really understood power as currency, the kind of power that you hoard up. The more of it you have, the more powerful you are. And he used that to reward his friends, to protect his friends, and to punish his enemies and protectors. You know, there was a survey that we cite at the beginning of our book, New Power, about the people most thanked in the last 30 years in the Oscars, in the Academy Award acceptance speeches, and tied for first place with Harvey Weinstein was God. So that was how powerful Harvey was. We all know that kind of power. Now think for a moment about the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement is the movement that helped to topple Harvey Weinstein, right? When this huge, unprecedented wave of tens of millions of women, largely, offered their testimonies, not just about Harvey, but about all of these experiences of abuse and harassment. Now, that was a sort of form of power that, if you're thinking about it as power, didn't work the way Harvey's power worked. If you think of Harvey's power as power as currency. The more of it you have, the more powerful you are. Zero sum. The power of the Me Too movement is really power that works like a current that is a surge of energy. It gets more powerful the more people join that current, the more people participate. The enabling mechanism of Me Too is that one person's testimony makes the next person's testimony easier, and so on. And suddenly you get this huge wave when for years those things were sort of sitting in the background. Second story. Right now, we are living through, of course, the biggest global health crisis in history. Tomorrow, well, not in history. The Black Plague was worse, but certainly in our lives. Next year, I should say. This is what happens in the morning in New York, right, when the coffee hasn't fully kicked in. Next year, we're going to have this extraordinary moment where we're going to try to be vaccinating 7.8 billion people. And there's a real threat that looms large as we think about that work, which is that all over the world, there are these incredibly powerful, they don't have big institutions, they're not in hospitals, they don't have government roles largely. They are communities of people spreading anti-vaccination misinformation. And they do that largely online, and they do it very effectively, right? They find ways to seed fear, to seed anxiety, but also to create a kind of sense of belonging that it's you against the establishment, right? If you're one of these anti-vaxxers. In some countries, including the country that I live, the US, more than 40% of people actually say they will not take a COVID vaccine. So that's a form of influence and power that's very different to that of public health authorities. So as we move into 2021, we're going to have this extraordinary clash between the public health authorities that in many ways we've rallied to during this crisis, right? Their expertise, their authority. But it will not be enough for them just to say, you know what, take the vaccine, it's good for you. We are going to need to build a movement to help every person on this planet get vaccinated. Third story is about a young Scottish schoolgirl called Aqsa Mahmood. She was a normal kid. She grew up in Glasgow. She loved Harry Potter. And then one day, Aqsa disappeared. And her parents, her distraught parents, heard from her a few days later. She'd called them from Syria, where she'd joined the Islamic State. And once she got to Syria, Aqsa became a really notorious and effective recruiter for ISIS. So Aqsa was basically building a kind of a girl-to-girl network that took the ISIS ideology, adapted it to lure in other teenage girls from the West, which she was very successful in doing. And her blog, it could have been a blog for Justin Bieber, but it was a blog for jihad. And you contrast that to the US government and the way that they dealt with the threat of ISIS when it first emerged. They started by getting fighter jets and just raining down leaflets on the civilian populations of Iraq and Syria. And when they realized that just raining down their ideas on the heads of these people would not be enough, they turned to social media. And they developed this campaign on social media, think again, turn away. So think if you're just on the verge of jihad, is the most persuasive messenger going to be a Twitter account with the seal of the US State Department? Probably not. So what do these three stories tell us, right? The story of this schoolgirl who outmaneuvers the State Department, the story of vaccine hesitancy and anti-vax communities, which are threatening our ability to get to herd immunity on the response to COVID as the vaccine arrives. And the story of this movement that helped to sweep away a titan that had held that iron grip for so long on power. These are all stories, I think, of the difference between what we call old power and new power. Old power, that power that works like a currency. It's based on what you know, what you own, what you control that others don't. It thrives in ecosystems that are closed. It is leader-driven. It is based on the download, right? New power is that power that works like a current. So the energy, it isn't something that you can hoard up. You can only really figure out ways to channel and harness its energy. And really our work is about how you do that. right? It's made by many. It tends to thrive it's based on what is uploaded, what people are participating, and it thrives in these ecosystems that are open, not closed. So here's another way to think about the difference between these two concepts, old and new power. This, of course, is Tetris, the #1 video game of the 20th century. Tetris was sort of a metaphor in many ways for old power. It was even developed by the Russians during the Cold War. Now, Tetris essentially is a block-based game where these blocks, are falling on your head. Your job is to sort them out into neat rows. The blocks get faster and faster until they eventually overwhelm you. So it's you against the system. You have very little agency. It's very rigid, and eventually the system wins. This is Minecraft. Minecraft is the most popular video game of the 21st century. And Minecraft, also this block-based game, but it really in every other respect works completely differently. It's all about what is uploaded. It's all about what is created by its users. There are no rules. Everything in Minecraft is real or imagined, built inside that universe, right? A lot of the physical world that we know is reproduced in Minecraft, and whole other worlds of imagination. And the way that you do things in Minecraft is you collaborate with other users. It's not a single player game. It's a collaborative game. So think about being a kid, right? Today, growing up in a Minecraft world where your exposure, you've been playing Minecraft all day and not Tetris, as many of us did. What is the difference there? What is that signaling to you about your role in relation to institutions, your expectations around how you get to participate in the world? And that really is what gives rise to this battle and balancing between what we call old power values and new power values. So let's take a few of these dimensions, right? But before I do that, I do want to point something out that I think is quite important, which is that we are not saying old power bad, new power good, right? There are lots of contexts in which old power values may produce better outcomes, fairer outcomes than new power. I'll give you a silly example. My co-author, Henry, had his appendix out just 6 weeks before our book came out. We were all absolutely concerned about him, of course. The last thing Henry wanted was a new power approach to his appendectomy. He wanted an expert, a surgeon who'd done this thousands of times before to do it again, right? He didn't want it crowdsourced by a bunch of hipsters in Brooklyn or in Amsterdam even. He wanted that kind of rigid, rule-based expertise. So to take a few different cuts on this, governance, right? We live in a world where I think patience with the formal institutions of governance, representative governance, managerialism, institutionalism, there's this push away from that. And lots of people are creating more networked, more informal forms of governance that are more opt-in. Doesn't mean they're fairer. In fact, they can be less fair. But that's certainly a shift as a lot of the kind of institutions of governance that thrived in the 20th century really find themselves under strain now in many ways. Transparency. We hear so much about this buzzword transparency, but really transparency isn't just a value now. It's an imperative, right? Institutions that are not transparent find themselves kind of occupied, as we like to say, whether or not they like it. So this traditional separation between public and private, is no longer something that people can count on. Expertise, I mentioned earlier. We think about the COVID crisis, right? The need we've all had for that kind of expertise. There's been a real turn back to public health authorities. And at the same time, there is this belief now that anyone can be an expert. In the Brexit debate, one of the ways that the anti-EU folks succeeded there was they said, we've had enough of experts, right? And that, of course, has caused, all sorts of challenges as folks have challenged science, challenged the climate science, etc. And, of course, affiliation and loyalty. People are not less affiliative today. They're in some ways more affiliative, but they tend to not be loyal to the same brand or organization or nonprofit for 30, 40 years, right? Paying their monthly dues. So organizations need to think about new ways to build around that. So all this led in our work, when we first published it in Harvard Business Review, to this framework, the New Power Compass. On the right are values, right? So do the values of an organization or an institution map more to the left or the right? And on the horizontal axis, on the vertical axis, the models. Does the business model, the core model of an organization, look more like a Tetris, right? Capture, exclusivity, or more like a Minecraft, mass participation, peer coordination. So this is a way of sort of understanding where the institutions in our world sort of sit in relation to these concepts. So I'll give you a very quick tour. Bottom left are the castles. These are old power values, old power models. Most of the organizations that thrived in the 20th century were castles. There are still some organizations that are doing very well in the 21st century that we would regard as castles. You think about an Apple, even though it's a tech company, the model of Apple is that there's a product designer in California who knows what we need before we know we need it. And then the new iPhone kind of descends from the heaven and we buy it. And it's a very secretive company. It's not collaborative, and yet one of the most valuable companies in the world. The bottom right are the cheerleaders. The cheerleaders are old power models sort of in shift, in flux, right? So they still have traditional business models, right? So you think about a Unilever. Unilever makes, consumer goods, we buy them. The Guardian newspaper writes articles, we read them. And yet those models are both shifting, right? They're opening up, they're becoming more transparent. The Guardian has shifted from a model based on subscription to one based on membership, where the reader becomes involved in the work of the newspaper, the research, the activism on behalf of its values. Unilever has done very similar things with its consumers as it's attempted to play a leading role tackling climate change. The top right quadrant are the crowds. So these are the pure new power models, you might say. New power values, new power models. Now, in the top right, you've got Black Lives Matter. We talk a lot about Black Lives Matter in our book, and we analyze the sort of leadership model there. So the important thing about a Black Lives Matter is it's not an institution at all, right?